Hi there, welcome to my tutorial on the artistic technique of pointillism, or some people call it stippling. So in this technique you layer dots on an image to create depth in any sort of image, but I like colouring. I've coloured this book called Ivy and the Inky Butterfly by Joanna Basford. So when I use the technique, I usually, through trial and error, I colour the details or the foreground of an image first, and then I've sort of worked out that I like using the pointillism technique in the background to make the foreground stand out more. So when I do this, I sort of think about in photos where if you look at a photo, the foreground is usually detailed, and in the background it's sort of blurred or sort of faded out, and that's what I'm trying to achieve in this picture. So I've coloured, or I've drawn in a brick stone wall in the background and coloured it with, I've used Faber-Castell polychromos to try and create the look of stone in the background. And what I'm going to use the pointillism technique for is to give the sort of added depth and feeling to the image. I'm just going to colour this right hand page first for this video, just to show you how you do the technique. So when I do the technique, I often use reference photos to see how it appears in real life. So this is a stone wall I printed out from the internet, and I wanted to do that but so I can see where there's light and shadow. So in between the bricks is shadow in dark places, and just there's like a fine line of light at the top of each brick to give it depth. So what I've started to do with this image is down here I've got a thin line of the dots just here. You can see that. So what I want to do is replicate that across the whole page to give it a nice sort of deep background. So when I've started this, I've got the dark lines where the bricks join. So I'll start with doing the pointillism technique quite sort of deeply, or concentration of dots to get the line. Now you might say, why don't I just draw a straight line? But that's not the point. I think of pointillism. Pointillism is subtle depth rather than hard lines to help separate the foreground from the background. So I'm layering the dots. You have to have a fair amount of patience doing this technique, which I sort of, once I work out where I want the dark, heavier dots and where I want the lighter dots, I sort of zone out a little bit to while I do it. So you can see I'm slowly building up a line of the brick in the wall that I've drawn, gradually layering it up, just to give an outline of what the brick will look like, brick or stone or whatever you want to call it. It is a technique that takes quite a bit of time, and it's a technique that I, as a teenager, played around with when I was bored at home. You can tell I'm a sort of an artistic person. I would get a photo of an old wooden building or something and copy it onto a paper and layer the dots to create so you could see the image. I just love doing it. And now that I didn't even know it was called Pointillism back then. I just was something I liked playing around with. And when I started doing colouring as an adult, I gradually, I was doing another Joanna Basford picture of it in the book Magical Jungle of a Chameleon. And I'd coloured the chameleon, and I suddenly thought, well, that's right, as a teenager I used to like layering dots, so why don't I give it a go on that picture? And I did it, and I'll put a photo of what it ended up looking like at the end of the video. But for now, I'll just show you how this particular brick looks like using that technique. So you can see there's just a few dots where I want it to be a bit lighter, and then when there's a shadow under the sword, for instance, I've put more heavy dots because I want it to look like a shadow. And then over here I'm slowly adding dots. This is one of the things I love about this technique. Instead of doing hard sharp lines and that's it, you can slowly build up the dots and sort of do it, pull back, have a look, see how it's going, and then add more dots where I think I want to add more depth. I'm thinking, because this is quite a dark spot in the image, I'll do lots of dots. You don't have to apply a heavy touch either. This can be very light and lightly held in your hand. So just more and more dots where I want the shadow, where I want the object and the coloured object to stand out more against the background. Don't have to be perfect dots either. It's just an impression of depth. It doesn't have to be perfect. And under this sort of beads and the necklace, I'm going to add more depth. So the shadow of the light is falling underneath the bead, but I'm adding more dots. And under the thread of the necklace, again, I'm adding more dots. And under the sword, I think if I was looking at a photo of a sword and it was propped into this urn, it would have a shadow because the light is shining, and the light's shining in from this side, and so the other side will be darker. So it's starting to come together. So I think I need to look back a bit. Yeah, so it's starting. I've got a shape of the stone, but I think I need to add this sort of thin line of light, like I showed you in the photo. So that means I'll go back up here. And sort of add a line. Hopefully it's going to work. If it's not clear enough, I can go, if the line's not clear enough, I'll go back over the first thicker line where the stones join and make it even darker, so there's more definition between the line and the line of the join and the brick. I think it just needs to be a lot darker with the dots, with it be like a dark shadow behind. Behind all these objects. And maybe more. So it's, I mean, in some places where you want really dark shadows, the dots can almost be so dense that you can hardly see the colours behind. And other parts where it's a bit lighter, I do less dots. So there we are, we're slowly building up the dots. I think maybe in this corner here of the brick. Might need more shadow. I think also the way I use the technique last is good too, because I've coloured in onto the stone where I think the shadows will be, or the darker parts, and where the lighter parts are. So it's kind of like a little bit of a sort of a template to know where I'm going to put the dots. And I'm constantly doing some lifting my hand away, having a look, making sure it's going okay, constantly checking, rechecking, going back. Adding more dots. And what I also do is I'll colour and use the technique across the whole page, and then at the very end I'll go back again and I have a look at the whole page as together and add more dots where I think it still needs more. So starting to get there. I'll colour this line, this join again. Sorry, not again. I'll continue this bit of stone across where I've drawn it in. So I get the basic framework of where the joins will go. This Uniball pen is still the first one I've used, so it doesn't seem to use up that much ink. Mind you, now I've said that, it might run out halfway through the picture, but that's okay. I'll get another one. Keep going across to here. Now, so here's the next brick or stone. Let's just call it stone, it's more descriptive. So this would be really dark, I'd say. This area here, so lots of dots. And the shadow of this goblet would be very dark up against it, and then it would lighten away from the shadows. So it's definitely not a quick technique. But I find that I often, if I'm colouring or using this technique, which takes so long, I'll often, I don't know, have the TV on or something in the background, and I'll look up occasionally and have a look and then look down again, because otherwise you can find it a little bit tedious. But I think the end result is quite effective if you have the patience to do this technique. Okay, so that's going well, I think. Now I must remember to do that highlight line across this brick, as if I forget, it won't look as deep or have as much depth, I don't think. So more depth here, more shading underneath the walls on the necklace. Adding more joining of the stones, darker areas, so I can see where I'm going to add more dots for shadows and less dots for lighter areas. So now you can see the general idea of how the technique works. I'll keep going. I'll turn the video off and keep going, and I'll show you the near finish page at the end. And it's basically just continuing the same technique, pulling back, having a look, seeing where you think there might need more shadow. So I think it'll be quite dark along the bottom where behind the ornaments there'll be a lot of shadows, whereas up here there's a lighter area up here where there's not so much darkness, I guess you could say. Maybe up here will be quite dark. I mean, the impression I'm trying to get is this is a dark treasure room. So there's going to be a lot of dots, a lot of shadows, whereas in another image, if there was other subject matter, it might be a lot lighter with less dots, but in this particular image it's going to be a lot of dots. So I'll come back later and show you the finished page, and hopefully it all works well. Thanks.